Hello, this is Adele Jones. I'm Professor of Social Work and Director of the None in Three Research Centre for the Prevention of Gender-Based Violence, based at the University of Huddersfield. I'm sorry that I'm not there with you in person, but I do hope you will enjoy this talk. I'm speaking to you from Barbados. Barbados is one of two Caribbean countries that were the pioneers behind the important work that the None in Three Centre is doing. None in Three, we take our name from the global statistic that 1 in 3 women and girls will experience sexual or physical violence in their lifetime. Our work is focused on preventing this from happening to any woman, to any girl, to any child. The UN defines gender-based violence as violence that is directed against a woman because she is a woman, or violence that disproportionately affects women. Gender-based violence includes physical, mental, or sexual harm or suffering, or the threat of such acts, coercion, and other deprivations of liberty. Often we would see the terms violence against women, gender-based violence, and domestic violence used interchangeably, although they do have slightly different meanings. We're also very concerned with violence against children, and although our priority focus is violence against women and girls, we're very much focused on preventing violence against boys too. Gender-based violence includes physical, sexual, psychological violence and domestic violence, sexual abuse including rape, sexual coercion, forced pregnancy, sexual harassment, sexual slavery, traditional practices that particularly harm women, such as honor killings, burning or acid throwing, female genital mutilation, dowry-related violence and filicide, violence directed against women in armed conflicts, such as murder, rape, abduction, emotional abuse, coercion, abusive language, increasingly technological abuse, economic abuse, the trafficking of women and girls for prostitution, forced and child marriage. Now, many of these different kinds of violence may impact males, boys too, but I think, as you can tell by this list of violence, that women would be disproportionately affected. It's important to understand that such violence occurs in both the public and private spheres. It not only occurs in the family, but in the general community, and is sometimes perpetuated by the state through policies or the actions of agents of the state, such as the police, the military, or immigration authorities. Also important is the fact that gender-based violence happens in all societies, across all social classes, with women being particularly at risk from men that they know. And perhaps finally, about this point of gender-based violence, in many societies, traditional norms, beliefs, and social institutions legitimize and therefore contribute to the perpetuation of violence against women and girls. My talk is focused around 3 important elements: innovation, education, and agitation. But before we can move on to any of those areas of our work, it's important to talk about the research that we've been doing to understand the nature of the problem. Researching the problem, of course, we are a research centre. This is what we do. It's essential that everything that we do is based on the best available evidence and information. At the None in Three Centre, we have established a theoretical framework that is derived from research that was carried out by myself and a group of Caribbean women experts over a decade ago. This research, which was commissioned by UNICEF and involves 6 countries in the Caribbean, led us to understand that gender-based violence may be global in scale, but it's shaped by local, social, cultural, and economic factors. It takes multiple forms and has multiple consequences. It cannot be understood without integrative research methods which address socio-cultural specificity. Violence against women and against children sits within a wider context of family violence. Central to understanding violence against women is the fact that attitudes to women and children are a primary factor, as are beliefs about the rights of male dominance and sexual entitlement. There is a strong correlation between violence against women and violence against children. We find that the misuse of male power is often legitimized through institutional practices and inefficient laws. Cultural values and practices can have the effect of condoning certain expressions of violence. Men are victims in greater numbers than we appreciate. Denial, minimization, victim blaming, and lack of empathy are all too pervasive. Most interventions are primarily reactive. We also need preventative strategies. And there is no single solution. We need multi-agency, multi-professional systems approaches which engage the whole of society. So this theoretical framework underpins what we do at the None in Three Centre. In terms of our current research, we are conducting mixed methods research and have been doing for some time now across 7 countries. Qualitative research with 450 adults to try to understand the etiology of different forms of gender-based violence in different countries. We're conducting surveys with up to 40,000 children in the countries in which we're working. And we're focusing as well on specific forms of violence, gender-based violence, that country teams have identified that need to be tackled. So in Jamaica, we're tackling child sexual exploitation. In Uganda, we're tackling child marriage and attitudes that condone it. In India, we're tackling violence against women. In the UK, we're tackling intimate partner violence within adolescent relationships. And as I said when I started, the pioneers for this work, Barbados and Grenada, are the countries in which we have done extensive research on domestic violence and its impact on women and children. This research leads us to understand that gender socialization as well as gender inequality combine to contribute to the problem. How boys and girls are socialized to become men and women is key. Negative attitudes to females are transmitted to children in precisely the same way as other information is passed down. So as children witness how adults treat one another, how men treat women, how men make disparaging, sexist remarks about women, children learn the values about how to treat women by witnessing, by observing, and by being immersed in those cultures. The perpetuation of gender inequality leads to male privilege and to power imbalances. And there is a need, very much clearly a need, to change attitudes while they're being formed. The surveys that we've conducted and are still carrying out on young people's exposure to violence tell us how children exposed to violence then begin to conceptualize as to the meanings of violence. We have generated a psychosocial questionnaire, which is a legacy that we'll be leaving in each of our partner countries as a tool for ongoing data collection. But by conducting surveys with children and young people from the age of 10 to 18 years in each country, we can understand the extent and type of violence children have been exposed to, how it impacts children, and also the ways in which the victimization of children contributes to the normalization of violence. This is essential for the interventions that we create in the None in Three Centre. So what we have done is to develop a program which allows us to create anti-violence, pro-social video games as educational tools to begin to change those negative attitudes around gender. We understand that the seeds for violent behaviours in adulthood are often planted in childhood. Not that children and young people have any responsibility to bear for the violence that is perpetrated by adults around them, but we understand that the attitudes that fuel violence actually get formed at a fairly young age. If we can instill positive gender attitudes and skills that contribute to peaceful conflict resolution, as well as developing empathy, then we know that we can do much to help prevent gender-based violence in the future. We also know that we need interventions that help children manage the trauma of the violence that they are exposed to. Which leads me on to my next point. And perhaps maybe the first, I think, highly interesting point. I think you'll find it interesting in terms of what we're doing at the None in Three Centre. We are innovators. So not only have we researched the problem, we have moved on to the stage of innovating in order to address the problem. So we've decided to harness computer technology to tackle gender-based violence. Understanding that prevention education programs addressed at young people provide the best possible outcomes in terms of preventing gender-based violence in the future. If we can focus on adolescence, when violence first starts, when attitudes about the acceptance of violence first start to manifest themselves, and if we can tackle this at an early stage, we can undo the idea that violence is a normal part of life. So trying to reach young people when their attitudes and beliefs about gender-based violence are developing before they become normalized is what we are attempting to do. And we have decided to use computer games to do this. Well, why computer games? Well, looking at this slide, one can understand that computer games enable young people to become immersed in a world that really can transform the way they think, the way they behave, sometimes negatively, but also, we believe, positively too. Computer games engage young people in a way that is very, very impactful. And in some of the countries we work in, children are more likely to access a computer screen than they are a textbook. We think it is a very important medium through which we can reach a maximum number of young people. Video games offer unparalleled immersion. They allow the player to be an active participant within a story rather than just watching it unfold. I'm not a gamer myself, but I have a son and I have grandchildren, and I see the importance of that immersion when children play computer games. And when immersion comes together with the right storyline, the result is an experience that no other medium can match. So at the None in Three Centre, we create games that immerse the player in a story about specific forms of gender-based violence. This helps to increase empathy, to raise awareness, and to empower children. It requires a seamless blend between the gameplay on one side and the learning principles on the other side. And the player's total experience is integral to this learning process. We know from our research that playing a video game can influence thoughts, feelings, and psychological stimulation. These can interact with each other, and through gameplay mechanisms such as achievements or choice-driven narrative, these things can reinforce each other. Playing a pro-social video game can increase interpersonal empathy and consequently contribute to improve pro-social interactions. So how do pro-social computer games work? Well, pro-social video games influence players' three internal states: cognition, the way in which children think about a problem. Affect, the way in which children begin to feel about the interaction, the character, the storyline. Arousal, the way in which children become animated and engaged and are driven to continue playing a game to reach a next level. These changes in the internal states can result in behavior change. If practiced repeatedly, short-term effects such as pro-social actions can actually be translated into long-term effects, such as new perceptual and decision schemata, as well as changes in beliefs, attitudes, emotional responses, empathy, and personality structures. This is not our theory. This is taken from the theory of the general learning model, which has been derived from a whole body of research around pro-social computer games. So having decided to innovate, our next important goal is to educate, and this is what I'd like to talk about next. The first computer game, pro-social computer game that we have developed, the Non-in-3 Centre has developed, is called Jessie. Jessie is the name given to a violence prevention tool based in the Caribbean. It's for use in schools and it teaches children about domestic violence. It is a storyline based on a 10-year-old boy who lives with his mother, his pet dog Alvin, and his mother's boyfriend. The story, which is around living with domestic violence, was created from research carried out in the Caribbean, and it draws on characters, environment, dialogue, and voices from the region. It has been designed specifically with Caribbean young people in mind, although we are finding that it has increasing applicability to young people wherever they are, because domestic violence is a universal problem, and although we have built in local cultural specificity into the design, all of the themes that we address are universal. So, for example, Jessie teaches awareness, builds empathy and non-conflict resolution skills. It teaches the impact domestic violence has on everybody involved, including children. It shows how gender stereotypes and inequality can contribute to violence in the home. It actually highlights the role of other factors, such as alcohol, as a trigger for violent behaviours. It shows how the different ways in which people might exert controlling, coercive behaviour over others. It challenges the idea that violence is a normal part or inevitable part of relationships. It is essentially empowering. It gives children the opportunity to challenge the person being violent and to support the victims through role play. It teaches that witnessing or experiencing violence can make children become aggressive too, but that there are non-violent ways for dealing with feelings and solving problems. It challenges the idea that being in control is part of being a man, or being controlled is part of being a woman. Most domestic violence is committed by men, but the game tells us that men can be very supportive and caring, and when men make a stand against gender-based violence, it can make a big difference. The game helps to generate skills, knowledge and competencies that can help children in real-life situations. So when Jessie has been rolled out in countries, children have talked about what's happening to them at home, but they've been able to use the information in Jessie to help them to get help. We trial our games in schools with students aged between 10 to 18. Each day represents a chapter. Each day in the school life in which we trial the intervention represents a chapter in the story, and each chapter is played for 20 to 30 minutes. We provide training to teachers about how to use the game, and we also provide tutorials and guidance for players as part of the story. We distribute the game on USB sticks so that it can be played offline as well as online, and this allows us to gather anonymous in-game play data, which helps us to understand the effectiveness of trials. Following the trials, games are refined and released for wide-scale adoption across partner countries and provided free for download across the world. And alongside the game, supportive curriculum guidance is provided for teachers to help them address sensitive topics. We also engage with education ministries in our partner countries to support the development of education policy so as to integrate the prevention of gender-based violence into the curriculum. And my next point, the final point of this presentation, is the role of agitation. So having sought to innovate, having sought to educate, it is also important to agitate. And what I mean by this is making sure that we utilize the research, the knowledge, the evidence that we produce from our work to produce change within the general public, change at societal level. And we agitate for change through the idea. The idea is a hub for impact, dissemination and engagement activities related to the None in Three Centre's work. It is at the heart of ensuring that our work is grounded in and makes a difference to the real world. So we develop and implement communication and visibility activities. We use the arts, we use the films like this, print, TV, radio, social media. We promote and inform the Centre's work. We capture the impact of our research. We capture the impact of our reach. We provide a forum for the public to engage with what we're doing. And we share information about our research and interventions so they can be widely accessed. And I would like to direct you to this particular short film. Our partners in India, we have a None in Three research centre based in India at the Indian School for Design and Innovation. The country directors, Banu Varma and Pratana Patil, will be talking to you in a short video clip just to show you the ways in which we are expanding our reach and engaging with the public.
So the None in Three project is partnered with the Indian School of Design and Innovation. Our team consists of a research fellow, Ms. Rupni Banerjee, and we also have a very young and enthusiastic media gathering team and a young persons advisory group. What we are attempting to do is to focus on gender bias leading to normalization of gender-based violence and reducing this down through the intervention of video games.
So this research focus largely because we believe that the violence part of harassment, any kind of domestic violence or any kind of harassment that arises in the society is the root cause is gender bias.
We've kind of culled this down after various discussions that we've had with stakeholders across diverse areas of research.
And while we did begin with the idea of domestic violence as our research focus, we realized as we spoke to many people that the cause is far deep-rooted than just the domestic violence just becomes outcome of the gender bias that we see.
By the time a child reaches his formative years in school, the child is already preset, the mind is already preset with gender roles. A boy is expected to be doing this, a girl is expected to be doing this.
Gender bias is again an outcome of the patriarchal thought system that we have as a very deep-rooted system in Indian society.
Unless and until we tackle this issue directly in schools, talking to children of a particular age group and explain to them in a language that they are able to understand how various genders have to be dealt with, nothing is going to change. And before we know it, it's going to be too late.
And it is very important now for us to be able to explain that it is gender bias which arises out of the patriarchal thinking system, and it just does not impact the older generation, it just does not impact women, but it starts from a very early influential age of children, which is the school-going children, who get exposed to several things at the same time.
And so finally, I just want to share with you the non-in-3 model that we have created. You would have heard me mention the importance for taking a systems approach to tackling gender-based violence. We are focusing on prevention, but even within this focus on prevention, we adopt a systems model. So we have a model of work packages that actually all inform one another. So, of course, we want to create our pro-social video games. In order to do that, we must do our research on the social and cultural drivers of violence against women and children. And then we can make sure that our games are informed by that research. We must also conduct our psychosocial surveys of children's exposure and attitudes to violence so that we can use that as a measure to assess and evaluate game effectiveness. Once we have produced the research, the results, the findings, it's important that we then feed that information into education reform so that we can embed violence prevention into the curricula. We also have a policy hub, and I would direct you to look at the policy hub on our website. And what this does is provides up-to-date information about policy developments in our partner countries in order to end gender-based violence. But through this, we also evaluate the process of implementing our interventions, and we provide training and translate all of our research into information for knowledge that can be shared with the general public. And this feeds into the idea, our impact dissemination and engagement activities. And so this brings me to my final slide, which is to say thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you to the GCRF, who have provided a grant to support this work. And in fact, together with EU funding and University of Huddersfield funding, we have received grants totaling £5 million, which have enabled us to establish the Non-in-3 Centre. And I believe we are the first global centre of its kind doing this kind of work. I would ask you to look at all of our social media platforms and to make sure you become a follower, supporter, that you like, that you repost. Thank you.